Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of Kickstarters launching this week. This is quite a large week. I think we've got over 20 games to cover, but I'm going to start with a new segment that I just started last week where I go over some campaigns and games that I just heard about. They're not necessarily launching next week, but they are some high profile games I think you might be interested in hearing about. And the first one is the Cuphead fast rolling dice game, and I'm mostly mentioning this one for its IP. This one isn't going to Kickstarter, but there is a pre-order now that you can go ahead and check out. I'm on USAopoly right now. I'm not sure if this is being offered anywhere else, but I'm sure you can do a quick Google search to find out more. The next one is for a Resident Evil co-op card game that was just announced, and this is different than the Resident Evil 1 board game that is coming out next week. This one's actually coming out in 2022, and it's supposed to feel a little bit like you're passing around a controller because every player is going to be controlling a single character, either Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield. And then we have a couple interesting role-playing games that were just announced. First, we have the Fallout tabletop role-playing game, and this one's actually on the Modifius website. Also not going to Kickstarter, but they do have their website set up a little bit like a campaign with a few different pledge levels, and you can go ahead and check this one out now if that's something that interests you. And the next role-playing game is coming out in 2022, but this one features IP from Cowboy Bebop, which is a really popular anime. It's one that I really recommend watching, and I know that they're also coming out with a Netflix live-action version of the show as well, which I'm super excited about. And it's really made a name for itself, and I know a lot of people that aren't actually interested in anime still watch this because it's such a great show. And that's all I have for some upcoming teasers, so with that said, let's check out the Kickstarters. The first campaign we have launches on October 18th, and it's called DreamWeavers. And this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a turn-based game where players are going to be weaving dreams for different subjects that are going to change throughout the game. Players are going to be trying to balance a dream meter that you can see at the top of the board here. And the red side represents more nightmarish dreams, while the blue side represents more paradise dreams. And neither of these is better or worse than the other. Different subjects will come onto the main board here, and they are the ones that are doing the dreaming, and they're going to have a name as well as some fun artwork. What you're seeing here is just outline prototype work. The actual artwork looks really great, and they also have some special abilities that will come into play, and they will affect all players, or they can also present different scoring opportunities. But there's also a little diagram underneath their name here that will dictate how the dream meter moves depending on the cards that the players play. Each card has a different dream type or color, and depending on the color that you play, you're going to have to check this diagram to see how that maps to the dream meter, and then you move the dream meter appropriately. And the dream meter is one of the main ways to score points in the game, and as you can see, there's a similar meter on the subject's card, and this one on the subject's card just represents their preference for different types of dreams. So different areas on the dream meter will actually score different amounts of points, so you may want to steer towards those or away from them, depending if you feel like you're going to score those points or your opponent. And this is a team-based game, so players will be playing together either on the blue side or on the red side. And the other way that players can score points is by completing different objective cards, and players can do that by having a certain set of cards inside the dream pool. And the dream pool is a really interesting aspect of this game because it uses a spatial element where you're placing cards into a space on the board, and no card can touch another card in the dream pool, and no card can go outside the perimeter of the dream pool. So depending how you place your cards, you might leave more or less space for your opponent player, which is important because if there's not enough space in the dream pool for another card, then your actions are limited and you're often forced to take a specific action. And a player just takes one action on their turn, but they have 4 to choose from, and the first one is to play a card into the dream pool. And there's 2 types of cards. There's whimsical and astral cards, and the whimsical cards will have a color on it, and when you play that card into the dream pool, it's going to manipulate the dream meter. But then it also has an ability that can trigger at certain parts of the game. It can either trigger when you play it, or when a dream is completed, or it may require other cards of a certain type in the dream pool before it can be activated. Each whimsical card you play into the dream pool requires that team to put a token on it, and those are a resource in the game, and once you have enough of them in the dream pool, you can actually claim the dream for your team, which gains you victory points. The astral cards are free to play, but they have to touch one of your whimsical cards already in the dream pool, and the benefit of these is that they can grant you some more powerful special abilities, and they can also be used to complete different objectives. The problem with these is that you don't get to put an essence token on it when you put it into the dream pool, so it's not helping you towards the goal of trying to claim the dream. And the next action you can do is claim an objective, and to do that you have to have the matching cards in the dream pool that the objective card specifies, and the objective cards are really nice because they can guarantee you certain points of a certain type of color, which I'll get to shortly. The next action to perform is to claim the dream, and to do that you need to either have a certain amount of essence in the dream pool, or you have to be unable to place a card into the dream pool because there's not enough space. And to do that, your team is going to claim points based on where the dream meter is and how that maps to the dreamer's preference on their subject card. Players will then place an eye token underneath the subject card, and most subjects wake up once there's 3 eye tokens there, but there's also light sleepers that wake up on 2, and deep sleepers that wake up on 4. Whenever a dream is completed, the board gets reset and players start again, but if the dreamer has woken up, then players will swap out the card for a new card with different abilities and different preferences for their dream types. And the last action a player can perform is the recharge action, which allows players to take any mix of 4 cards and essence tokens, but it is restricted by their individual essence and card hand limits. In the draw deck, there's also sun cards, and these act as a timer towards the end of the game because if 8 ever get drawn, it triggers the last round of the game. Some sun cards can also cause some special effects, like putting your dreamer into a lucid dream, which will have some environmental effects that affect all players as long as it's in that state. And victory points are scored on 2 different tracks. There's the Nightmare track and the Paradise track, and players are going to score points based on their lowest value on either of the tracks. This means that each team is going to be trying to have an equal mix of both types of points, since their lowest one is the only one that gets counted. Definitely a really interesting game here, and it is one that I played and I thought it was a lot of fun. I really like the way that the spatial element worked with the ability cards because it really limits the amount of cards that you'll be able to play before a dream is completed and those cards are wiped away. So you're really going to want to be efficient with your cards because certain abilities can only activate if certain other cards are there. So trying to match those types of cards while also working towards either an objective or completing the final dream, I think is a really fun puzzle. And I was a little skeptical at first about the theme because dreams are a little bit abstract to begin with, but I think they did a really great job tying the theme with the actual gameplay. So if this is one that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out their campaign page. I have a link in the description below and you can click to get notified. And now we're getting to games launching on the 19th, and the first one we have is Downtown Chase, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a game that I thought was launching last week, so I actually just covered it. So rather than getting into this game again this week, I'll just link you to that video, which I had already posted, and you can check out more info right up here. Also launching on the 19th, we have Steam Up, A Feast for Dim Sum, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes 45 to 60 minutes to play and makes me really hungry just looking at it. This game is a competitive medium weight set collection and action management game where players are customers of the most legendary dim sum restaurant in the entire world. And the goal of the game is the same as any sane individual's goal at any amazing restaurant, and that's to eat as much as possible. Players will each be playing as unique animal characters with their own character sheet and abilities. And if you like deluxe components, you'll definitely want to take a look at this one because it really sells the theme. This one will actually have a turntable with different stacks of dim sum trays, and then in each of those trays you're going to have tokens for the different types of dim sum. The turntable is really interesting because each player has their own feast area, and in order to take a dim sum tray, that tray needs to be in your area, which means you're going to want to turn the turntable until the appropriate tray gets to you. And in this game, players are going to be taking turns, and on their turn they can perform 2 out of 5 possible actions, and the first action they can perform is to gain food tokens. And food tokens are important because in order to gain any tray of dim sum, you need to have the tokens that match the actual dim sum in that tray. And the next 2 actions is that you can either draw a fortune card or you can play a fortune card. And playing a fortune card grants you special bonuses that will affect you or other players at the table. The third action is players can discard 2 fortune cards for a token. And the fourth action is that players can actually purchase a steamer. And to do that, they'll have to pay tokens equal to what's in the steamer. And the steamer must be rotated to that player's feast area. I didn't specify it for each action, but some of the actions I just mentioned also allow you to rotate the turntable, which will help you get the steamer that you want into your area. When you take a tray, you add that dim sum to your player board, and you're going to be filling up the different tracks for the different types of dim sum, gaining more points for the more that you gain of each individual type. At the end of each round, a fate card will get drawn that will trigger an event that can affect all players, and the game will end either when the fate deck runs out or when a specific number of steamers is purchased. Once the game ends, the player with the most points wins the game. And one more thing I want to mention about this game is it was entered in a few design contests, and it actually won the Ion Award for 2021 and was a Cardboard Edison finalist, which are both really impressive feats. The game also has quite a lot of ratings over on its ratings tab, And if I filter these down to the comments, you can see some feedback from a lot of people that have actually played the game. All this information really gives me confidence in the design of the game and proves to me that these designers are trying to make this game as best as it can be. Also on October 19th, we have another really interesting game, and this one's called Pachamama, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is an exploration and hidden information and deduction game where players are going to be using a combination of certain elements to try and deduce where certain crop tokens are going to appear to work towards winning the game. At the start of each game, a scenario disc is chosen, and this is what houses all the secret information. The scenario disc is going to outline the starting tiles used for the game as well as the tiles used for the entirety of the game, and it's also going to specify the crop tokens and where they get placed on the different tiles. One side is kept secret from all players, while the other just dictates the initial setup of the game. This is going to get slid into the actual Pachamama wheel, which has some sliding windows, and players will be rotating the disc depending on different coordinates on the board in order to determine which crop tokens will be placed there. And this is a game where players have a number of explorer meeples, and on their turn they get to choose one out of 2 actions. They can either explore or divine. If players choose to explore, they'll be able to move existing meeples on the board or add a new meeple. When they do that, they'll be able to move that meeple as much as they want orthogonally, as long as it doesn't cross paths with another player, and the meeple will also stop on any empty space. So you can actually move your meeple as much as you like, as long as it meets those requirements. And when a player ends their movement on an empty space, they're going to be adding a tile there by using the discovery disc and rotating it to match the coordinates of their meeple's location. The wheel that the disc was put in at the start of the game has some sliding windows, and players are going to be opening up the sliding window to see what tile type is going to be added to the board. Once you place that tile, you increase your diversity track for that type of tile that you placed, and you're also going to gain points for the terrain type that it was. And then there is the divine action, which I think is the really interesting one here because it allows you to deduce which crops should be placed on which tile. And this is going to allow you to deduce the crop tile that goes on all the meeples you've placed out on the board that are currently on an empty terrain tile. For each one of those meeples, you'll be able to make a guess as to what crop tile should go onto that tile that your meeple is standing on. And you'll be able to do that continually for each of your meeples as long as you continue to make correct guesses. So players are going to choose one of their meeples in any order, and then they're going to make a guess as to what crop tile will go on that tile. Another player will take the wheel and rotate it to the coordinates to see if you're correct, and regardless if you're correct, the actual crop tile does get placed onto the board, and you're going to score points based on that crop tile. Different crops have different values, so you're going to really want to try to align yourself with the more valuable ones. Players will also gain an offering cube that matches the color of that crop type, and players can only own one of each color. At the end of your turn, you'll be able to trade those cubes for additional victory points, and the more unique colors you have, the better, because it exponentially increases the amount of points that you can get. But now I'll get into how the actual deduction works, and in order to deduce, there's actually 2 layers of deduction that players will have to consider. The first is the terrain types, and then the second is the crop tiles. So for the terrain types, there can never be more than 5 touching terrain tiles of the same type, and they can't be touching each other orthogonally or diagonally. Crop types are ranked from 1 to 5, and there can only be 1 of each crop type within a group of terrain tiles, and the maximum rank of crop tile that can be available in a group of tiles is equal to the number of tiles there. So that means that you can only have a rank 5 crop in a group of 5 terrain tiles. Same crop types can never be touching anywhere on the board, and that means that they can't be adjacent to each other or diagonal. So to sum everything up, players will want to get their meeples out on the board and position them on empty terrain tiles so that they can take the divine action, allowing them to deduce which types of crop tiles that they're standing on, and then gain the victory points for those crops. And the game ends once the last terrain tile is placed, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. I think the deduction in this game will be really fun because sometimes you'll know exactly what tile you're on, or other times you might have to make a guess, which is always exciting. I think the whole puzzle of moving your meeples while also trying to match your meeples with the tiles that you're most confident on is going to be a really fun challenge to try and complete. So if you're interested in this one, definitely go ahead and click that follow button on the campaign. I have links in the description below, and that'll also get you an additional scenario disc for a unique gameplay experience. Also on the 19th, we have Ozam, and this plays 2 to 7 players and takes about 3 to 30 minutes to play. And this is actually a collection of 5 different card games that use 2 decks of cards. There's the Moon deck and the Sun deck. One deck of cards is going to have a picture of cute little animals on it, while the other one is going to have the words that match that image. Each game is designed to be very quick to play, and it's suitable to play with children. The first game is called Hunt Ozam, where players will have a hand of moon cards which have the words on them, and then the sun cards are all going to be laid out on the table. Players are going to count to 3, and they're going to be competing to race to gather all the cards matching the cards in their hand first, and the player to do that wins the game. The next one is also a real-time game, and this one's called Ozam, and it's similar to Spot It. We're going to be having all the sun cards face up on the table, and then a player is going to draw a card from the deck, and then every player can look at it, and the first player to slap their hand down on the matching card gains that card, and the player who has the most cards at the end of the game wins. And the third game is called Slap Ozam, where all cards get shuffled together and then dealt to the players, and players are going to be flipping cards from their decks continually until a gold card is drawn, and the first player to slap their hand down on it gains all those revealed cards. The player with the most cards at the end of the game wins. And the fourth game is called Ozam, and this is a game similar to Go Fish, where players are going to be shuffling all the cards and dealing 3 to each player, and then players will ask the other player if they have one of the matching cards in their hand, and if they do, they get to go again. If they don't, then they draw a card from the deck. Any matched cards are put down on the table, and those will score points at the end of the game. The player with the most points wins the game. And the last game is called Ozam, and this is a card flipping memory game where players are trying to match cards, taking turns flipping cards, and then trying to remember the ones that were previously revealed. Players who match cards are going to keep those, and then the player with the most cards at the end of the game wins the game. These games are designed to play very quickly and support high player counts, so games can be played as one-offs, or they can be played as first to win 3 out of 5 games. And they're also offering a very generous 60% off the price of the game for anyone that subscribes ahead of time, so if this seems like a game that you'd like to play with your family, definitely go ahead and subscribe and get that 60% off once the campaign launches. Also on the 19th, we have the City of the Great Machine, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a 1 versus many game where one player is playing as the city or the Great Machine, and the other players are playing as revolutionists trying to fight back. This is also a game that was supposed to launch a couple weeks ago, so I've already covered it. So rather than covering it again in this video, I'll just leave a link to that right up here and check that out if you want to know more. Also on October 19th, we have Circadians Chaos Order, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 120 to 240 minutes to play. And this is coming from the publisher Garfield Games that has published a lot of very popular games, many of them ranking in the top 100 on Board Game Geek. And I do want to clear some confusion here because this is not an expansion to the game Circadians First Light. This is actually a standalone game, and when they do make expansions, you can expect the naming convention to look a little bit more like this, where they have the Circadians, whatever the name is of the game, and then they'll have a dash and the expansion name. So they are using a little bit different of a naming convention than most other publishers. But in this game, players are factions on a once peaceful planet, and on this planet, some ancient relics of immense power have risen from underground. And this has pinned the factions against each other because although they were once peaceful, they don't quite trust the other factions enough to hold the power of these different relics. So players are going to be competing to try and gain control of these relics themselves so that they can dictate the outcome of the planet. And this game has a global win condition where if any one player is controlling all the relics on the map, then they're going to win the game. There's 6 relics in total, which means that there's a maximum of 6 rounds because each round, if no one meets the global win condition, then one player is going to gain a relic. And the relic that is resolved is the one that matches the number of the round. So the player that is controlling that relic at the end of the round gains it. Removing a relic each round means that the global win condition is going to become easier and easier to achieve since there's going to be less relics on the board to try and control. And as you might have guessed, this is a very competitive confrontational area control game where players will be controlling asymmetrical factions that are very different from each other. There's going to be unique leaders and attributes, there's going to be upgradable player boards, and there's going to be unique buildings to construct for each of the factions. And there's also a unique win condition for each faction that wins the game for them immediately, in addition to that global win condition that I already explained. In each round, players are going to be putting out numbered tokens out on the left-hand side of the action track, and the person that places that token is going to be able to perform that action for free, but the number on the token is going to dictate the price that any other players have to pay if they want to also perform that action. And players are going to have to pay the player that put the token there. So the player that places that token is going to want to put a number cheap enough so that players are still willing to take that action, but expensive enough so that they're not leaving any money on the table. Players can also upgrade their actions by moving their player cube up on each action track, which will gain them some additional benefits when they perform that action. So between this and the upgradable player boards, there's a lot of engine building throughout this game. And players will be performing different actions to perform research, construct buildings, and harvest resources, as well as recruit and move different units across the board. There are movement restrictions depending on the different terrain types out on the board, and if there's more than one player in a given area on the board, then that's going to trigger a combat. And the way that this works is that only 2 players will fight at a time, and the winner of that will move forward while the loser is removed from that space, and this continues until there's only 1 player left in the space. Players will be using a combat wheel that allows them to perform different actions or upgrade certain stats during a battle, and players will be adding the results of their combat wheel with the leaders, buildings, fighters, and faction-specific abilities they have at that specific location. A really neat aspect of the combat wheel is that you can gain new tactics cards to put in the center of the wheel here, and this is going to change the value of the numbers that you see below the wheel. So as you rotate that wheel during your planning phase, it's going to improve some of the abilities that you have at your disposal. This continues until a player completes either of their objectives, and then that player wins the game. Launching on October 19th, we have Kabula, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 30 minutes per player to play. And the Kabula is actually a magical tree protected by a formidable beast on a strange island. And this game is recommended for ages 16 and older due to its crass take on most of its subject matter and characters, as well as its sophomoric style of humor. And players will be competing to be the first to take out the mythical beast that's protecting the Kabula and claim it for themselves. Throughout the game, players will be manipulating different tokens which represent that character's health energy, but they also represent different body parts on that character. Players will be spending those to perform different actions, and they have 2 basic actions that they can perform. The first action is a pretty simple one, and that's to rest, which quite simply just lets you refresh your used body parts. And the second action you can take is the move action, and you're going to be spending some of your body part tokens in order to move, and you're going to be moving to try and explore different dungeons, engage in different encounters, shop in cities, and attack other heroes and wild monsters. There's quite a few different monsters in this game, and if you take a close look at some of them, you'll know that this definitely isn't a game that takes itself too seriously. Fighting in this game will use dice rolling, which determines which body part will be hit, and that can trigger special behavior actions, weak points, blocks, counterattacks, and all sorts of good stuff. A neat thing about defeating monsters is that the Kabula actually brings it back to life, and it comes back as your pet and ally, and it will move independently of you on the map and allows you to perform some new actions. As players upgrade their hero, they'll be making different customizations by upgrading their skills and unlocking personality traits depending on the choices and battles that they engaged in. Each character has 3 wildly different personality cards that will change the way that you play depending on the personality that you've unlocked, and these will change the way that you interact with different encounters on the board and will allow you to unlock some different upgrades. The player that becomes strong enough to defeat the final boss and claim the Kabula for themselves wins the game. And launching on October 19th on GameFound, we have Too Many Bones Unbreakable, and this plays 1 to 2 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And this is an expansion that's actually a standalone conclusion to the Too Many Bones franchise, so you don't actually need any other content in order to play this game. This is also going to be the final campaign for Too Many Bones, so if you want those promo cards or exclusive content, this might be your last opportunity to try and get your hands on them. And if you're not familiar with Too Many Bones, it's a very popular game with one of the highest rankings over on Board Game Geek with an overall rank of 40. And I'm not surprised that this one's our Discord pick of the week. And this is a cooperative game where players are controlling a character who are a member of a party set on a quest to take out a final boss. The components in this game are incredible, so expect a very premium experience, but also a premium price tag. And I think this is the only game where I've seen a character player board made from a neoprene mat. And your characters are wildly upgradable in this game. You'll be rolling all sorts of skill dice, and there are a ton of different dice. And all the characters play very unique from each other with their own specialties and abilities and weaknesses, as well as a ton of different abilities and powers that are all outlined on their character sheet that is very reminiscent of the character sheets you might see in role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons. And just to make things a little bit more weird, each character and monster is represented by a stack of chips, and the amount of chips in that stack represents their health. Of course, this isn't too weird if you're familiar with chip theory games because they include chips in all their games. But on your turn, you're going to be rolling a number of dice equal to the value of your dexterity, and you can roll either attack and defense dice, or you can roll any skill dice that you've unlocked throughout the game. And rolling skill dice allows you to upgrade different character-specific skills or improve different stats for your character, like your dexterity, so you can actually roll more dice in the future. And a couple of the reasons that this game is so popular is because you can upgrade your character in so many ways, and you can play the same character over and over and always discover a new way to play or some new skills to unlock and chain together that you haven't experimented with before. Another reason this game is so popular is because the dice rolling is really tight and it always gives you an opportunity even if you roll poorly. If you happen to roll any bones, that die fails and it doesn't help you in your battle, but you will get to put it onto your bone track, which as you upgrade throughout the game will allow you to unlock some special abilities or devastating attacks. So when it seems like the end is near and the odds are stacked against you, this is a really handy trick to have up your sleeve. All battle takes place on this battle mat, and players will be trying to position the different characters based on their strengths and weaknesses and what's most strategic depending on the enemies that you're facing up against. And as I mentioned before, the enemies are also represented by stacks of chips, but they'll also have their own unique characteristics and abilities that will activate while they're in combat. If players can continue to defeat their enemies and upgrade their characters enough to take on even stronger enemies and eventually take out that final tyrant, then they win the game. And the new standalone expansion is going to feature 2 new characters as well as 5 new tyrants as they try to traverse the dangerous caverns underground using the same mechanisms that you're familiar with from Too Many Bones. And if you're familiar with Too Many Bones, you can expect this expansion to be about the same size as the Undertow expansion, but this one's going to have more of a lava theme and it's going to have a brand new battle mat. And what makes this player mat different is that it'll be covered in double-sided chips that represent either hot lava or hardened cooled lava. And these are going to flip throughout the game, causing damage to whatever characters or enemies are on those tiles, although some enemies can be immune to heat. But I think this is really going to add a lot more excitement to the battle because it's going to add some more clever ways to injure your opponents, but it's also going to incentivize players to move around a lot more in the board because there wasn't really much incentive to move your characters around once the battles actually started in the original game. And if you're wondering, all this new content will fit in the trove chest with all the existing content, and this campaign's also offering a crossover loot pack if you subscribe now, so go ahead and subscribe to the campaign if it interests you. And these will feature some different loot cards that reference some aspects of other chip theory games. But that's not all, because this campaign's also going to include a bunch of new material for all their previously released content, and that's going to include 3 additional characters, as well as a ton of extra content for the existing expansions. And all that previous content from previous campaigns will also be offered in this campaign, although some of it in limited quantities that you'll only be able to buy from the pledge manager. Also on the 19th, we have Nightbreak, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 50 minutes to play. And this is a medium weight competitive fantasy battle card game. And in this game, players are going to be choosing their unique faction's hero deck. Players will choose 3 cards from their entire deck that they want to start the game with, and then they're going to be shuffling up the rest as their draw deck. But then 6 cards are going to be removed permanently from the game. Each round, players automatically gain a blessing token that can be used to activate different powers or escape the battle undetected or pray for more blessings in the future. But players will also use their hero's abilities along with dice rolling to attack their opponents and try to inflict damage to win the game. As the battle progresses, you're going to temporarily retire any of your characters from battle once they've taken too much damage, and you'll draw a new hero from your deck. The opposing player gains a victory point anytime this happens. Each round, a card from the time deck is discarded, and once all those cards are used, the player with the most victory points wins the game. Also launching on October 19th is the Hand of Destiny, and this is a solo game that takes about 10 to 20 minutes to play, and this one's interesting for a couple reasons. The first one is that this designer also is the same person that designed the game Gloomholden, which is a no table needed 18 card version of the epic game of Gloomhaven. I haven't played this myself, but I do know it made a bit of a splash in the community a few weeks ago. And if you check out the comments under the ratings tab and try to filter out to the ones that seem like they've actually played the game, it seems like this is a game that people generally enjoy. And the second reason that this one's so interesting to me is because it's super accessible, plays quickly, and just plays in the palm of your hand. So you can just play it anywhere while you're laying on the couch or whatever, which is a nice little feature when you're just playing alone. And that's a big part of the reason that Palm Island is not only my most played solo game, but also one of my favorites, because it's just super accessible and you can just play it anytime, anywhere. And I also legitimately like the puzzle that it presents. But in this game, you're fighting off hordes and hordes of enemies as you make your way towards a final boss, and you'll be using your hero's limited strength, resources, and unique abilities to combat against your foes and move through the deck. You're going to be managing your health, upgrading your hero, and playing cards as efficiently as possible in order to win the game. And just like Palm Island, the cards here are double-sided, so I wouldn't be surprised if they get rotated throughout the game for various reasons. And I do think this game will play quite a bit differently than Palm Island, but seeing a few similarities to a game that I already know and love does make me very interested in this game, because owning a game of that small of a package, I'd be happy to own more that have a similar playtime and ease of setup. That gives me a few different options when I do want to play a quick solo game. And I wish I saw this while doing my research, but the designer actually put out a really quick how to play video that you can watch in under 4 minutes, and I'll leave a link to that right up here if you want to see more on the details of the actual gameplay of this one. And you can check out their website to sign up to their newsletter to get notified of launch. Also on October 19th, we have Senjutsu Battle for Japan, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play. And this is a dueling game of deck construction and simultaneous reveal. And in this game, players are going to choose one of 4 unique samurai, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and motivations. And this game uses a card classifying system to make deck construction really easy. The cards are graded either as jade, gold, steel, or wood, and these different types are going to outline how many of that specific card you can include in your deck. So this is going to make your deck construction really quick and simple to do. And players are going to be constructing their decks with different cards for attacks, blocks, evasions, meditations, and dynamic special moves. Players will position their samurai on the hex-based battlefield, and then they'll draw a hand of ability cards from their deck, and then they're going to place a card face down with their opponent's cards and simultaneously reveal. Players will then check the initiatives of their cards and the effects that that card has, and then resolve the encounter to see which players evaded, attacked, or dodged, and if any of them took any damage. The first player to inflict 5 wounds on their opponents wins the game. Also launching on the 19th, we have the Dutch Resistance Orange Shall Overcome, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a scenario-based cooperative game that's focused on the Dutch resistance during World War II, and this game has a large focus on the actual characters that were a part of the resistance and their stories that go along with them. And a nice little detail that makes this game really interesting is that the designer is actually a historian, and the characters are all real, and the stories are all based on real history. And the main mechanisms in this game are pick up and deliver with some resource management and action selection. So players will need to move around the board to try and gather different resources that they will need to use at different locations. Players will also be revealing different control cards each round that will present different challenges to the players that they'll have to deal with. And each character has their own unique board and ability, along with a small deck of cards that's specific to that character. And players will be trying to manage 3 different tracks, which are their alibi track, their bravery track, and their safety track. And players will want to keep each of these tracks high enough so that they don't get caught or worse. Each scenario offers its own win and lose conditions, so if the players are able to fulfill the win condition before the lose condition is met, then they win the game. Also launching on October 19th is Hungry for Humans, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 10 to 30 minutes to play. And in this game, you are a human with a monster friend that really wants to eat humans. In order to curb your monster's hunger for human flesh, you're going to have to keep it full with the best food that money can buy. Each round, players will secretly choose a hunger level for their individual monsters, and each player will be submitting dishes to a meal that the hungriest monster will eat. Players can then play monster power cards to help their own monster or sabotage their opponents. Once that's complete, the hunger levels of each monster will be revealed, and the hungriest one will eat all the food and gain all those points to their power level. If a monster eats too quickly and goes over a power level of 20, it becomes too powerful and explodes. And alternatively, if your monster doesn't eat the right food, or if it goes below 1, it's going to get hangry and eat its human, taking that player out of the game. The most powerful monster standing after 15 meals will win the game. Also on the 19th, we have Valroc, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And in this game, players are playing as wizards in a competition to acquire the Archmage title. And for that, you'll have to defeat or tame multiple creatures. The game is divided into 2 phases, and the first phase is the drafting phase. And during this phase, players are going to be drafting different monsters that they're either going to have to fight or attempt to tame. And the second phase uses primarily worker placement, where players will be putting their worker disciples out on the map in order to perform different actions like train their skills, attend magical lessons, and pray to the gods, and earn skill points in each of the 4 elements of fire, water, earth, and air. And the first player who has defeated or tamed 6 creatures wins the game. Launching on October 20th, we have Aurora, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 15 to 30 minutes to play. And in this game, players are competing to create sentient life in multiple star systems across the galaxy. Players are going to be doing this by maxing out different resources such as water, oxygen, and carbon. And each round, players are going to be collecting different resources to try and expand or create different star systems or slow down the creation of their competitors' star systems. Each turn, players are going to be using action cards to perform different actions, and players can perform 1 negative action on another player, but then they can also perform 2 positive actions on themselves. After all the cards have been played, all the ones that were not used get passed to the player on your left, then everyone draws back up to 8 cards and a new round begins. This means that you might want to use certain cards just so your neighboring player can't use them against you. The first player to complete one of the win conditions of supporting different life across different star systems or maxing out certain resources wins the game. Launching on October 21st over on GameFound is Lords of Ragnarok, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a re-implementation of the game Lords of Hellas, which is a game that I know a lot of people love, and it has a really great ranking of 241 over on Board Game Geek, which is really impressive. And this one is going to be my pick of the week. And I don't know exactly how to feel about that because I'm personally not a huge fan of Awaken Realms. I don't like that they have so much plastic in their games. I feel like a lot of the miniatures are unnecessary and just take up way too much space, cause shipping to just go through the roof, and then just makes the game more fiddly because I have all these different miniatures that I'm juggling between. They've also released a few games in the past that I personally felt weren't at a quality level in terms of design that's acceptable for release into the public. And I know that a lot of other people really like these games, so don't just take my word for it. But to me personally, I felt like these games just weren't ready for release, and they just have a few design flaws that I just think are unacceptable in any game. But I'm happy to say that I don't have these same concerns for Lords of Ragnarok, and there's a few reasons for that. The first is that this is a re-implementation of a game that I don't think shared any of those flaws that I just mentioned. And whenever you make a re-implementation of a game, it's a great opportunity to take feedback from your players and make some improvements and tweaks to make your game more streamlined, easier to play, and more exciting, while cutting out anything that may have bogged the game down. Lords of Hellas was a game that I always wanted to play, but I never did get the chance to, so I don't know how different this one is from Lords of Hellas or what exactly the changes are, but I did go into depth for the rules on this one, and I can say that they look quite solid. And the main components of this game are the main board that's split into different realms with some different regions on them, and then there's also an action wheel that will go in the middle of the board in this black space here. And each game you're going to have different monsters put out in the different regions on the board, and each monster has its own different abilities as well as weaknesses that they are susceptible to. Loki is the strongest monster of them all, and you can't actually attack Loki until you've defeated 2 other monsters on the board. There's a few different troops that players can play as, and they each have their main hero as well as a hero insert, and that's going to get placed into this player board along with a bunch of other miniatures, including some different priest tokens, your boat token, and your troop tokens. So in terms of miniatures for this game, it looks like there's going to be roughly the same amount that you would find in a game of Blood Rage, which I think is the perfect amount of miniatures. I personally wouldn't mind seeing a few more different monsters and final bosses, so if they add 10 to 12 more miniatures by the end of the campaign, I think that's perfectly acceptable. But we'll see how out of control this gets by the end of the campaign. There's also a couple of these destructible and buildable monuments that players can put their priests into to earn some different benefits, and these will also be placed out on the board at the start of the game, but starting with just the base. And you can't really see it in this image, but each of these miniatures actually has a little wheel in the base that's going to display the amount of strength that that miniature has. And of course, this is an area control game, so it's important to note that the different regions on the map have different numbers on them. And in order to control that region of the map, you need to have a presence there with a total strength equal or greater than that number. And on your player board, you can see 3 different tracks. There's the authority track, the strength track, and the wisdom track. And you'll be able to upgrade these throughout the game, but they dictate different things like the strength of your miniatures, as well as the maximum strength of a region that you can control, and the number of cards that you can draw when you go to draw cards, and the maximum number of cards that you can have in your hand. There's also a hero slot on the board where you can slot in your character's hero tile, and that's going to dictate your unique ability and your player miniature that you're going to be playing with. There's also a slot for an origin tile, and origin tiles grant you another special ability, but these are not unique to your characters. Instead, you're going to be drawing 2 tiles at the start of the game and then choosing the one that you want to play with. And on a player's turn, there's a number of actions that you can perform. You can either pray to send priests to monuments, and when you do that, you're going to gain benefits that scale with the completion of the monument. So if you send a priest to a more completed monument, you're going to get more benefits for that. You'll also be able to heal wounds if you've accumulated any wounds on your player tracks, as well as move player miniatures around on the board. And my favorite action is that you can spend rune tokens that you've collected throughout the game to perform a whole list of rune-specific actions that get stronger the more runes that you spend. The catch here is that if you want to spend more than 1 token, the tokens have to have different icons on them, so that means that you can never spend 2 of the same rune tokens together. But some of these actions can be to gain control of different monsters, activate a monster, make alliances with neutral realms for special bonuses, increase the strength of your army, make additional movements, draw additional cards, or increase your stats, or deploy more troops. At the end of the round, players can place their player tokens out on the action wheel to perform some additional actions, and this will allow players to do some bonus things like attempt to take control of regions after the round, as well as build monuments or temples and activate different realms to benefit the players there. A neat aspect of this game is that it offers both PvP and PvE combat, but if you're fighting against a monster that's not player controlled, the player to your left will take control of that monster temporarily just to act as the environment as you fight against it. Of course, they also want to do a good job so you don't get too far ahead, so you can expect a real challenge. Players will be using combat cards to fight against each other and perform some special abilities, but monsters also come with a monster card that has a bunch of icons listed on it, and the player fighting against that monster will have to discard combat cards that match those icons in order to defeat that monster. PvP also uses combat cards, and then player's strength in the region is also going to come into play, and the player with the highest strength at the end of a battle wins that battle. And this game has 4 different win conditions. The first is that if you defeat Loki, you win the game immediately, or you can try to build 5 temples in 5 different regions, or control all regions within 3 realms. The 4th way is triggered by in-game events and is known as Ragnarok. At the start of the game, 5 Ragnarok cards were randomly drawn, and they display different objectives on them. If 3 of 5 cards are completed, it's going to trigger the final round. After that round, the player that controls most regions around the action wheel wins the game. And of course, don't forget to follow the campaign page before it starts because you'll get a free Valkyrie hero added to your pledge. Also on October 21st, we have Somewhere Under the Rainbow, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a game all about the beauty of building rainbows. You're going to be feeding different unicorns, gathering their poop, and then using that poop to create beautiful rainbows. On a player's turn, they can perform one of 2 actions. They can either gather unicorn poop tokens, and to do this, they're going to be using this handy plunger component, and they're going to be using that to pull the tokens out of the main tray. The second action you can perform is to visit the village, and when you do this, you place the tokens of the same color into the Rainbow Maker machine to gain some glitter cubes. Players can spend these glitter cubes for different ingredients in order to create different meals for the unicorns, which gains the player victory points. This also allows the unicorns to produce more rainbow material. Anytime there's 6 different colors added to the machine, a rainbow is formed, and the contributions of each player will be earned as victory points. The game ends after 4 rainbows are created, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. Also on October 21st, we have Final Challenge, and this is a party game of completing simple challenges, and there's 5 different challenge types. The 5 challenges come in 5 different colors, and you're going to be shuffling these all into a draw deck at the start of the game. Each player gets a player board and a player aid to track their progress, and on a turn, a challenge card is drawn from the main deck, and at that point, the player can try to complete the challenge. If they are successful, they add the card to their player board, and each card comes with a one-time use ability that they can use at any time in the future of the game. But if they don't complete the challenge, they discard the card and play goes on to the next player. Players can also ask for volunteers instead of completing the challenge themselves, or they can use different cards to attack other players. Players will want to complete a challenge of each color because when you do that, it unlocks your final challenge. Each card has 1 word on it, and the final challenge is generated by piecing together these words and interpreting them. Completing your final challenge gains you a passive ability, and when you complete 2 of them, you win the game. And finally, if you're still around, those were all the games that I had for you this week. But don't leave yet because we do have a giveaway to announce. I just have one this week, partially because I haven't had a chance to go through my queue of upcoming giveaways, but I do have this one ready to go. So you'll probably want to subscribe and tune into next week's video because I'll probably have a few extra giveaways for you. And this one's going to be for Zoo King, which is a strategic zoo building card game, and players are going to be trying to complete different sets of animals while upgrading their staff and their zoo to try and gain the most victory points. If you want to learn more about the game, I have a little preview video you can check out right up here. This giveaway is going to be for the basic admission pledge, which gets you a copy of the game. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag zoo, and let me know what your favorite animal is. And I'm actually on a tight schedule, which means that I gotta go right now, so I'm not gonna have time to draw the winners from last week's giveaway, but I'll take my laptop with me and I'll draw the winners and I'll still record the screen. I just won't have any video or talking over top of it. We're also really close to 5,000 subscribers, so if you wanna help me hit that milestone and you haven't subscribed yet, definitely do that and I appreciate it. And if you have any ideas for something special I should do for the 5K milestone, let me know and I'll do my best. Either way, thanks so much for watching and have a great week. Until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.